Hello, good morning, welcome. Thank you for joining us today on this session on Beyond the Lockdown and, opening up business and going back to work. We're very pleased to be joined by Ian Pilbeam, who is the CEO of HR Department in Edinburgh and Lothians. Now, I know you were expecting to see Karen Meechan do our little fireside chat with Ian. Unfortunately, she's been called away, and you've got myself. I'm Heather. I look after marketing and comms for ScotlandIS. Should probably point out the elephant in the room right now. I have lost a tooth, unfortunately, had a bit of a riding accident, and there are no dentists open, so hopefully it doesn't distract too much. But yes. If you've been to our previous webinars, or if you've not and you want to check out the old content, you can jump onto our YouTube channel, which you'll find just by searching ScotlandIS when the session finishes. You'll also find this video up very shortly afterwards. We thank you all for allowing us to continue to support the sector and answering all of our frequent surveys, phone calls, emails. This is letting us speak to UK and Scottish Government, ensuring that the sector's voice really is heard and that stimulus packages that are needed are there and available, that changes potentially to things like the Future Fund are there so that they really do help businesses, especially in Scotland. But as I say, today we're going to be looking at business resumption and how do you get your team back into the office and working cohesively together. So Ian, if I can just get you to introduce yourself to our delegates, that would be great.
Sure, yeah. Good afternoon, everybody. Good to be with you. So, yeah, Ian Pilbeam from the HR department. So we run a HR service, funnily enough, you might have guessed that from the name. We also help businesses with health and safety as well. And right now, of course, these two things are coming together more than ever before, as this really is a people situation and a health situation. So I look forward to answering some questions today.
Absolutely. Now we want this to be a really open discussion, so if you can use the Q&A feature as we go through, I'll put the questions to Ian as we're chatting. You might find that they're not coming up. It might be because we're about to cover that topic off. But of course, anything at all, pop it in there. Ian is happy to answer. So, Ian, the first thing that we'd like to come to is, one of the big fears for many business owners is around the all or nothing nature of the job retention scheme or furlough. How can we come out of lockdown effectively as a business with either insufficient work or funds and get round to that unfurloughing the team?
Yeah, well, you're right, Heather, that the scheme is an all or nothing scheme. So, as I think you probably all know now, nobody can do any work whilst they're furloughed. So that is going to be a challenge when, as lockdown is lifted, you have some work and some income, but not necessarily enough to employ people on a full-time basis. We have been lobbying government on this, UK government, and not just us, but we have been lobbying them, and a number of other bodies are getting involved as well. And it does look like there could well be some flexibility from UK government on this. So what I hope that means is that it will be possible to do part-time working with state subsidy for at least some of the wages of the time that isn't worked. So we'll wait and see. Rishi's been fantastic really in listening and reacting. So, whatever some of the bureaucracy issues have been around the schemes. So fingers crossed for that. But nonetheless, sadly, there are going to be redundancy situations across all sectors. Now, how vulnerable your members are to this may depend on which sectors they predominantly support. So members who predominantly support hospitality, travel and tourism, I suspect are going to have a hard time. And we've already started doing some redundancies in such businesses. So there's redundancy is both simple and complex. It's simple in so much as it's a process. It's complex because there can be variance in that and moving parts, and because people don't always get the process right. So simple reminder, that for there to be a redundancy situation, there has to be what in law is called a cessation or a diminution of work. So you're either stopping doing something or you need less of it. Now, where there's one person for one role and you no longer need that role, it's fairly straightforward to identify as that person. Where you've got 5 people doing that role and you need one of them, as a business owner, we probably automatically know who's going to be leaving the building. But the law requires us to go through a process. So we need to look at pooling. We always need to consult, and we need to do that at the earliest possible opportunity with the view to avoiding the redundancy or mitigating its impact. Even though we might have made our mind up already, the law requires that we do that consultation, potentially selection if it's not a standalone post, and then of course a dismissal process and then a right of appeal. So I think getting professional support on that's going to be really important. There will be redundancies. Some of you will have layoff clauses and short-time working clauses, and you may be able to use those. The other option is to get agreement from your workforce to reduce their hours or reduce their pay. And we know that in times like this, people will agree to things that they wouldn't normally do because they want to keep their job and they're grateful to have a job, and they know it's going to be difficult to get a new job very quickly. But the key thing is you need to get their agreement and get that documented. So we're hearing lots of stories of people who are having their pay reduced unilaterally by their employer. That is unlawful, and the claims will surely follow. And even if the claims don't follow, the way you treat your people through all of this will determine how much loyalty and productivity you get from them moving forward. Treat them well, they'll be with you forever now. Treat them badly, they'll tell all their friends, and they'll go for the first job they can get when things pick up again.
Yeah, I think that's very true, and it's something we've been quite glad to see within the sector, that they do seem to be looking after their staff and talking to them as well as they can do and are able to. But of course, there is also the flip side to that, and I think, as you say, those businesses will suffer from it later. Yeah. Given what we've been talking about in terms of Rishi hasn't as yet announced what his return to work package is going to be, but the likelihood is there will be one. We're likely to hear something over the next few days, Sunday, Monday. Some companies might be bringing people back off furlough one at a time. They might not be bringing the whole team back together. So have you got any ideas on how you could complete a phased return of staff without the feelings of inequality or the mental health side of things that might go alongside it? So those who are back first, or those who have been left at home on furlough, that kind of them us type feeling.
Yeah, I think it's really important to recognise in this that everybody's different. So we've got, we are all different. We're all unique. And that's saying treat people the way that you would want to be treated. I've always disputed. I've always believed it's treat people the way that they would want to be treated. Yeah, because what's right for you, Heather, will be wrong for me. Okay, personality types, background, context, circumstances, all of that. And I think we've just got that on steroids right now. This is such a personal experience for everyone. Yeah, what are my working conditions at home? Yeah, if I'm 20, I'm probably living in a single room with my parents or in a shared flat. If I'm 45, and I wish I still was, if I'm 45, I've probably got a decent home and various spaces in the house to work. But maybe I've got kids biting my ankles. Maybe I haven't. Maybe I went into this with my mental health not strong anyway. Right? So I was saying to someone this morning, when I started doing HR in 1872, the single biggest cause of absence at work was not mental health. I don't even remember anybody talking about mental health back then. It wasn't 1872, it was the early 90s. But it was all musculoskeletal. Yeah, so it was RSI because we got keyboards and typewriters still, and bad backs and necks and knees because we were built for the industrial age, and we were still to a large extent working in industrial age roles. We now work in the knowledge economy. So now it's all about mental health. And I'm sure I saw a stat that I think more than half of all absence is now mental health related. Now, the thing is, I always say this, we all have physical health and we all have physical ill health. It might be permanent or it might be temporary, but we all have both. And the same applies to mental health. So we all have mental health and we all have mental ill health. For some people, that's permanent, depression, anxiety. For some people, it's temporary and it's a dip. Now that might just be that can go from a bad day to a bad lifetime. It's in that range. Okay. So if you went into this with mental ill health, the chances are you might come out of it with worse mental health than you went into it with. If you went into this with addiction issues, the chances are they'll be worse. Yeah. So many people I've spoken to have said, I've been drinking too much at home since this all started. And that's people who don't have an alcohol addiction, right? So if you go into it with these conditions, it's going to have had potentially an adverse impact. Even if you didn't come into it with these conditions, you're more likely to come out of it with that. So as employers, I think being really clear on that and supporting people, not just during lockdown and or furlough, but afterwards as well, because this isn't going to be a single event. You know, Nicola, who's speaking just to the left-hand side of my screen as we talk, and I'm trying to see what she says, but I'll talk to you instead. I think she's saying she's going to do what Boris does if she possibly can. That's what I think I'm reading on the subtitles. You know, Nicola says this is not going to be a flick of the switch. It's going to be a process that's going to happen. Okay, so I'm already hearing stories of people who've been brought back from furlough and are really struggling because actually they liked being furloughed. Yeah, and their pals still are, so they're feeling an inequality, and it's almost like I'm entitled to be furloughed. I'm hearing a lot of that as well. People think they're entitled to be furloughed, that somehow they've got a right to sit at home and be paid by the state not to work, which is a bit of a worrying trend. So we need to think of all about that, and the final point I'd make to think about is grief. Right, so I'm being really cheerful now. But the simple reality is two things can cause grief. The first is bereavement, and the other one is, in a work context, your colleagues being made redundant. You're the survivor. Okay, so your work pals aren't there anymore. So right now, we've got a higher than average death rate for obvious reasons, but we've also got a lot of people, which means it's going to touch more and more of us as this goes on. Okay. But also people aren't able to grieve in a way that they normally can. You know, I have a client whose dad died a couple of weeks ago of COVID-19. It was the funeral on Monday. Only 6 of them could go. The kids couldn't go to their granddad's funeral, right? And that client, she said to me, it doesn't feel real at the moment. At some point it will, and that will hit her, and that might be weeks, months down the track. Equally, when you put the gang back together, if you've done some redundancies and some of the gang aren't there anymore, there will be that workplace grief. So I think, I'm sorry, this is not very cheerful, but as a responsible leader and manager, we need to think about these things. One of the things we've been putting in place for quite a few clients in the last 2 or 3 weeks is employee assistance programs. So employees can get counselling support. And that's employers, our clients going, we just want to make sure that we're doing everything we can to support people. So, have a think about things like that, but just be aware and treat people like people. Yeah.
And I think that in these situations, not the pandemic, obviously we've not had one before, but I think treating people as people is always the key, like having that open and honest dialogue with them. Especially what you say about, the grief of those who might stay whilst their colleagues or friends are made redundant. That would be pretty hard.
Yeah.
And likewise with the addiction thing, I wouldn't say I was there yet, but I certainly had one or two more gins than I might have done before.
Yeah.
And I suppose, well, if you're putting all of that together, so you've now got a team that, you know, maybe don't want to come off a furlough, maybe don't understand why they're back, some are grieving, some are potentially looking for a substance of choice. How do you go about getting them to work cohesively and really actually get them working together again? Like, bring that value back and stop them feeling, you know, are scared for the position going forward, or devalued because they had been furloughed and their friend hadn't. How do you start that team mentality, team feeling coming back into it?
Yeah, so I would say, and we've touched on this already, I would say communicate more than ever before, much more than in peacetime, and understand, this thing about understanding people as people. One thing I'm hearing, and we're helping people with this, but I'm seeing this as really good practice, is actually doing return to work interviews, discussions when people come back. You would do it if they've been off sick, they've been out of the workplace for a period of time. You might do it if they've been on a career break. Well, right now, whether it's coming back from home working or it's coming back from furlough, actually discussing with people, what was it like? What was good? What was challenging? What did you learn? Because there's this thing, of course, in furlough about encouraging training. So I would imagine a lot of you members have got people who are furloughed doing online training at the moment. So pulling out the benefits and the learning from that to bring it back into the workplace. You know, so treating this as a process, not just a single event. It's not guys, we're coming back on Monday morning, put the kettle on, how's your weekend? Off we go again. This needs to be carefully discussed and worked through. And some of the challenges that there will be actually identified with people. I mean, you mentioned them and us situations. I think there's a risk and there's an opportunity. So the risk is where some people have been furloughed and others haven't. Okay, so I do see that as a problem that leaders need to work through, and make sure that those that have been working, that their efforts are recognised, because they might be resentful of those who just sat at home in the garden, come back with a suntan with all their stories about the wonderful time that they've had whilst they've been working away. The opportunity I'm seeing is collaboration. So I think we probably all recognise that we've seen a lot more collaboration between organisations over the last few weeks. This we're all in it together mentality, which I think has been really strong and really good news. But I'm also seeing that there's greater collaboration and a breaking down of barriers within organisations. So between perhaps back office and front office, for example. Now that's partly coming because there's been time for some at least, there's been time to look at systems and processes and join the organisation up a bit more. It's partly because there's been more communication, because there's been that daily huddle or twice daily huddle, more than you would have done in the office. And that includes everybody, including perhaps those that work remotely, more often. But also, again, many of you have been doing team drinks on Teams, you'll have been doing Zoom quizzes, all this sort of stuff. It's just broken down barriers within the organisation. And if you can bottle that and bring it back after lockdown, I think that will stand you in really good stead moving forwards.
Brilliant. Thank you for that, Ian. We have had a question in just on your training point there. Right. So, question goes, my understanding is that under furlough, our team are allowed to do training. Is that the case? We have a training course that would really help us future-proof our business, but some of the team members are saying we have to pay them on top of their 80% if we expect them to do training. Is that the case?
Okay, a furlough question.
Sorry.
All right, it's all
We
right.
were talking about training, so I thought, might as well pop it in here.
On another webinar last week, I was actually inadvertently introduced as Ian Furlough.
To be fair, that's why I call you in the office.
Yeah. So, two-part question, right? Can furloughed employees do training? The answer is yes. It doesn't break the furlough. In fact, the job retention scheme actually says that training is encouraged. So HMRC, bless them, are actually encouraging training for furloughed workers, right? Doesn't mean you can force people, but you can ask them and it's encouraged. And of course, if they don't engage with that, it's probably not going to help their case should you need to reduce headcount later, although again, understand why. In terms of the pay question, so the problem with the job retention scheme, or one of the problems, apart from the fact it's all or nothing, is there's been so many versions of the blooming thing, right? And anyone that is of a vintage to remember Only Fools and Horses, right, might remember Trigger's broom, which I think had, so it was the same broom but had 17 handles and 15 different heads or something like that. So the job retention scheme feels a bit like that at the minute. And the section on this is quite confusingly written unless you break it down. So I can see why employees are confused on this. If your employee is on national minimum wage, national living wage, 80% of pay brings them below. Right? So let's pick a number that's false but illustrates the point. If the national minimum wage was £10, people were working, you have to pay them £10. They're furloughed on 80%, they now get £8. That is permissible because the national minimum wage only applies to when you're working. Okay. If you ask them to do training and they agree, they're working. So for the time that they are training, you need to top it back up to 100% to avoid breaching the minimum wage. But that only applies to people who are on minimum wage, not to everybody else who's above it, unless they're only just above it, and it would still bring them down. You need to do that calculation. Is that? I hope that's demystifies that a little bit.
I think that might have answered the question. Let me just double check with us. Yeah, I think that answers it. So essentially, as long as you bring them back above minimum wage, if you're expecting them to train, then we're good. Yep. So one of our other, she said that is amazing. Thank you very much. So, and that's 100% clear. So definitely question answered. Ian, I can see your question. We will come to that a little bit later. But we've been talking about bringing the team back together again, but about training, grief and whatnot. What do we do if someone refuses to come back, either through fear, health and safety issues, which I know we're going to come on to, or a perceived but not mandated need to shield, or childcare issues, or, as you said earlier, they're just enjoying furlough a little bit too much?
Yeah, and it could be any of those. So again, we're going to need to talk to them and not jump to assumptions about why. Mm-hmm. There are a range of options. The option could be to continue with furlough, depending on the reason. So for example, the furlough scheme does allow you to furlough somebody for childcare. They've got caring responsibilities, if that was the reason. But of course, bear in mind, the furlough scheme is not going to be around for that much longer, at least not in its current form. So that would only be a stopgap solution. It could be that you can agree with them some flexible working. So maybe they can be home-based until they feel safe again. Maybe you can't, so it's just an option. Maybe it's unpaid leave, but that would need to be with agreement. Maybe it's a conduct issue. because they've gone and got another job, or they just can't be bothered. But you'd have to prove that. I'm not a huge fan of people losing their jobs on disciplinary matters right now. Disciplinaries are harder to do right now for obvious reasons, but also, you know, that's a massive consequence. So, for example, we're dealing this morning with a case in a care home where somebody has been acting like a Premiership footballer and slash government scientist advisor, actually. So they've been going between their own home and their boyfriend's home, which of course is in breach. But the boyfriend's been having house parties, right? Okay, and they work in a care home. So we are going to suspend because of the health, whilst they're tested. We could dismiss, absolutely. That's a serious health and safety breach. But it's also someone just being stupid in unprecedented times. So I think a little bit proportionality is important. So talk to people, be sensible, and find a solution, which is probably from all of those. Redundancy could be an option, but again, remember, redundancy is about the post, not the person. So it would be difficult. But again, I heard this morning on a call somebody saying to me, you know, I'm not planning any redundancies, but actually I've had an email from somebody saying, if you were going to do any redundancies, I'd be interested, please. At which my thoughts are, that person doesn't want to be on the bus and they're offering to get off the bus. If you can afford to help pay their ticket to get off the bus, do it. Yeah. So yeah, there's a range of options, Heather, but again, take professional advice and talk it through and work out what's best. Yeah.
I think that's absolutely the way to go. Also point out here that we do have, we work with Ian at ScotlandIS, and we do have in our member benefits section of the website access to Ian and his team at a member rate for you. So if you don't have the HR support, if any of these are measures that you're considering, I would urge you to go and check out that section and, you know, maybe get in touch. Just on that, Ian, so we were talking about people who might not want to return. We don't really want to turn it into a disciplinary where it doesn't have to be, quite difficult to do. The flip side of that is you're going to have some employees who have shown like amazing loyalty to the organisation. They've really gone the extra mile. Can we reward them for that? But equally, those who the work ethic wasn't quite as good. How do we manage these issues, especially if there are perhaps performance issues or absence or conduct issues prior to lockdown? As you say, you don't really want to be getting into that whilst we're not all in the building, but this is looking at being back in the building, hopefully. So,
yeah, good. So both are coming up. So in terms of people who've gone the extra mile, then you've got, I guess, a peacetime range of options. Yeah, you might want to give bonuses to people to thank them. You might want to give them additional leave, particularly if you have people who were working and others weren't. And even more so if you've had people actually going on site when everybody else was at home. So cash, got three ideas: cash, time off, or alcohol. And
feel free to Jane.
Yeah. But I'm hearing lots of good practice, and I say alcohol, it doesn't have to be alcohol. I'm hearing lots of really good stuff of people sending hampers, bottles of wine, pizza making kits, fruit boxes, all of this sort of stuff. Doesn't cost a lot, but by goodness, it goes a long way. Yeah. So yeah, reward people in whatever way you feel appropriate, but do reward those who've gone the extra mile at the very least. On the flip side of your question, I think there's two things here. I think employers are finding out over these few weeks who are their best and most loyal workers and who isn't. The ones that aren't are standing out like a sore thumb. And I'm hearing people saying, I'm happy to furlough them, but I don't want them to come back. I'm also aware of a lot of employers who have kicked the can down the road. So they had somebody that they'd maybe tolerated underperformance, and maybe they were going to continue to tolerate it, but now they're not. Or maybe they were about to deal with it, and now they're going to have to as they come back, because again, they don't really want this person back. So I can see what a lot of businesses will do is they'll press the redundancy button. That's an easy way of dealing with it. And I'd just bring you back to, it's got to be a redundancy. That may be a convenient way to deal with it, but it's got to meet the redundancy test and be handled correctly. So there may be that. Equally, I'm sure there will also be a number of disciplinary stood up and performance discussions to be had over the weeks and months that come. But I do expect, Heather, that most of it will be dealt with through redundancy, I'm afraid.
Yeah. And I think, again, just important to note that people have to do that correctly. Follow-up question to that, because I have actually been asked this by a couple of members, and I've got pre-primed you on this one. What happens if you have been kind enough to accept a member of staff back on that has submitted their resignation throughout the furlough period? Is there any special way that you have to consider when furlough ends to allow them to move off and not end up in any kind of dire HR situation if or whatever?
Hopefully you took professional advice before you did it, and you crafted the welcome back letter correctly, so which said we're bringing you back, but only so you can get furlough. You're not going to be accruing annual leave, and as soon as furlough ends, you're away again. That's what you should have done.
Yeah.
If you haven't, and you brought them back as an employee, period, you're going to have to dismiss them, and then do that fairly and through a proper fair process for a valid reason, which is likely to be redundancy. So hopefully they've done it right, and they've pre-agreed that it's cheerio at the end of furlough.
Yeah.
If they haven't, they definitely need to take advice.
Wonderful. Thank you for that, Ian. Sorry, I had forgotten to include that earlier on. Just on then, so we've made staff redundant if we've had to. We're working through our issues in terms of bringing the team back together. There's also that element of having to actually get everybody physically back into the office environment again. I know you guys have a second arm that look after health and safety, and so that's why I'm pitching this question at you. But how do we make sure that we're adhering to the social distancing guidance? Do we need to update our H&S policies, keeping everybody safe? Does it need to go as far as like one person, one pen, and no sharing? Thinking particularly about the tech sector and the way that we tend to work and our members tend to work. There's a lot of post-its fired up onto a board that people will share and move and touch. Do we need to have gloves? I don't know. But it's all questions that people are going to have to consider as we move back into the office environment, hopefully.
No, it's a great question, and the short answer is we don't know either what each workplace needs to do, for two reasons. One is we don't know what the public health guidelines will be. So although we've seen leaked stuff earlier this week on the return to work plans, we don't know what's going to come out for office environments. But secondly, each workplace is different, and therefore each workplace needs to be risk assessed. And that's what's going to need to be done. So less the health and safety policy, more the risk assessments of the workplace. So I'm just going to do a little legal bit just to explain this. Right? So we've got health and safety legislation and we've got employment legislation. So what health and safety legislation says, of course, is it's health and safety at work, and an employer has a legal duty to ensure a safe place of work and safe systems at work for its employees and those that come onto that site. Okay, so that's been the case since 1974. So we've got that. On the employment law side, it says that an employee is protected from detriment and from unfair dismissal if they have a reasonable belief that they are at serious and imminent danger to themselves or another person. Okay, so they have to have a reasonable belief that I'm a serious and imminent danger to myself or another person. And if I have that reasonable belief, and it's my belief that matters, not the employer's, then I am entitled to stop work. And if I do so, you, Mr. Employer, cannot cause me any harm. So if you dock my wages or discipline me, I'm protected against that. If you sack me, I'm protected against that. Or if I feel I have to leave the job or not come back to the job, I'm protected from that as well. I need no length of service. I can go for automatic unfair dismissal with unlimited damages. So it's uncapped. Okay, right. So I'll take you back to the most important word in everything I've just said, and it was the word before belief, reasonable. Okay, so for me to have a reasonable belief, I need to believe that I, as a reasonable person, not an unreasonable person, I'm at serious and imminent danger, or someone else is. Okay? So as an employer, how do I protect myself against that? And it's the risk assessments. Okay, so I take the place of work and the activities within the workplace. I look at the risk factors, which has changed because of COVID-19. Yeah, so I'm now looking at social distancing. I'm looking at hygiene. I'm looking at hand washing. I guess in particular those three. And I'm looking at the work activities and going, what's the risk and what are the ways that I can mitigate the risk? And then depending on that workplace, so for example, whether there's hot desking or not, how close the desks are to each other, where the toilets are, where the kitchen are, all these sorts of things will determine, can we move back into that work environment? And if so, what are the control measures that we're going to need to put in place? And only then do you then start to answer the questions about, do we need screens, glass screens between desks? Do we need to move desks? Do we need to wear gloves? Do we need to ban post-its and stop hot desking, or whatever it might be? But you need to go through that risk assessment process first. If you do all of that, you communicate that, you document it, you communicate it to your team, you consider any remaining concerns that they have, and you keep it under regular and transparent review. And I would suggest you get that done for you by a health and safety professional and signed off by a health and safety professional. The chances of your employees having reasonable belief that they're at risk of serious and imminent danger has been pretty much removed. So that's the way to do it. So very, very short answer is proper risk assessments. But hopefully that wider explanation helps people to understand why it's so important to do it that way and get it right.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think it really does. Like when you recognise the type of claims that you could come up against if you don't have that paperwork in place, if you've not communicated it properly, it doesn't bear thinking about. We do have a question in. So if anybody else has any questions regarding anything that we've been speaking about so far, or you've got a burning question on furlough, because we do have Mr. Furlough with us, feel free to add them to the Q&A. But we've got a question in from Ian, which is, again, on furlough, why does HMRC forbid some working from home during furlough? As far as he understands, staff are not even allowed to acknowledge emails.
Yeah, so I think, I'm not HMRC, but I think I know what was in their minds. And it was about fraud. It was about employers claiming furlough and still having people working, which is clearly not what the scheme's about. And that's why they went for the all or nothing nature of it. So what it says is that the employee can't do anything that either generates revenue for the employer or provides services to the employer. And it's hard to think of anything that an employee does in the course of their duties that doesn't fall into one of those two categories. The only one I can think of really is attending a disciplinary hearing. Yeah, it's not really providing a service to your employer, it's just being disciplined. So what they have allowed is the training, of course, which we've talked about already. So I know why they've done it. It has caused some issues. It does mean I know there are plenty of employees who are checking their emails whilst furloughed, right? And I also believe that that is not within the rules of the scheme. And those employees are taking a risk as to whether to do that or not. Now, the thing with risk, of course, is it's about impact and likelihood, right? So how likely is it that HMRC will find that out? Well, what we know is that they've given themselves 5 years to audit all claims. And when £40 billion goes out the Treasury, by Jove, they are going to audit it to death. We also know that when they audit other things, for example, national minimum wage compliance, I understand that they use self-employed bounty hunters who are on commission based on how much fault and fines they can find. So you put those two things together, then there's going to be people sniffing around trying to find fault. So don't give them something that they can find, because they might just take back from you all the furlough money that helped you to survive. In fact, a national minimum wage, it's double the wages that haven't been paid. So who knows what fine system they might put in place. They've reserved the right to do criminal prosecution, and of course the reputational damage of being the people that defrauded the taxpayer during a national and global pandemic crisis wouldn't be particularly good. Will that apply to people checking their emails? Who knows? But my view is likelihood low, impact high. Don't go there.
Yeah. So make sure your staff can't access their emails, I think would be number one, because it's the employer that's going to get hit, not the staff member. Okay. Now, do we have any more? We do. We've just had another question submitted. Oh, Ian's saying thank you very much for that. Okay. Now, do we have any more questions for Ian while we have him? I'll give you a couple of seconds to type, but I'll give you one. How do we deal with employees who are currently shielding in terms of coming back to the workplace? Is the continuation of furlough, is it like sickness absence but not counted within the same core, or?
I think that one is going to depend on how the government work the scheme forward. So we know right now that they can be furloughed, and by and large that's what's happening if they can't work from home. It will be interesting to see what the government says, and I'm talking UK government here, in terms of if they do taper the scheme out and phase it out and allow part-time, whether they'll also allow those that have to be shielded, because there's people who think they should be shielded but don't meet the criteria. So those that have to be shielded, whether they'll allow those to get state subsidy or not. And if not, I would imagine it will be sick leave. But yeah, I think we'll need to wait and see.
Great. We don't seem to have any more questions. So could you then just wrap up for us, give us your top tips on furlough, bringing people back, anything you think that the folks need to hear, but equally, if you let them know a bit about the services that you provide. As I say, we have a member discount arrangement with Ian and his team, but on top of that they provide some fantastic services, and I know we did do a scheme during the start of the pandemic that helped businesses. So Ian, over to you. Yeah. Top tips and a bit more about what you guys can offer.
Okay, I'll keep the top tip brief. 3 C's. Communicate, as we talked about. So communicate more than ever before. During lockdown, talk to people about how you're going to come out of it, both from as an employer perspective, but also as a business. Be as open as you can about that without scaring the heebie-jeebies out of people. So communicate. You think I'm going to go communicate now, don't you? I'm not. So consult. So listen to people, treat them as individuals, hear their concerns, and then consider. So consider, what does this mean for mental health? What does this mean for health and safety? What does this mean for working patterns and flexibility? What does this mean for your business model and that lovely word called pivot, and how that might affect job roles and job responsibilities? So not just the number of jobs, but what people do, what skills they need, what hopes and anxieties they may have around that. So communicate, consult, and consider would be my 3 top tips. In terms of how we can help people, well, normally we work predominantly on a retained basis, and normally that's on a 1-year agreement. Right now we are offering return to work packages, which are just for 2 months. So 1 for HR and 1 for health and safety. So the HR one, funnily enough, deals with the HR issues. So what are the key HR issues? Well, we talked about a lot of them, but clearly if you're going to be doing redundancies, layoffs, wanting to agree changes to contracts, handle flexible working requests, then we're offering for a fixed fee, 2 months, unlimited support, advice and documentation to cover all of that. And that's relatively low cost. It starts, I think, at $495 up front for that 2 months unlimited service, depending on headcount. For health and safety, we've talked about risk assessments being key. So again, we're providing 2 months unlimited health and safety support, advice and documentation, which includes putting that return to work plan together, doing the risk assessments, getting them signed off, and guiding you through the process. That's the same fee, or we're doing a slight reduction where a business decides to take both because that's what they need. Beyond that, you will know, Heather, that I've been rather prolific on LinkedIn in the last few weeks. So if anyone isn't connected to me and just wants to be kept up to date with what's going on, and occasionally get a controversial view or the odd rant, then please do link in with me, Ian Pilbeam. I'd be happy to take your connection and add you to my network and be added to yours. Okay.
Fabulous. Thank you very much, Ian. And I would urge you all to go and find them on LinkedIn, because it's supposed to entertain, if nothing else. But they also definitely do inform. So if we've got no more questions, let me just thank you all for coming. Massive thanks to Ian for, again, being our HR superstar and coming in and helping where he can. If you've got any questions, drop them an email to us, get us on LinkedIn, get us on Twitter. And yeah, hopefully we'll see you at some of our events very soon. A recording of this will be with you in the next hour or so. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.